FBX and glTF. FBX and glTF are both industry standard file formats. They're quite complex and can store different types of data related to 3D objects, scenes, animation, and so on. FBX is a far older format. So it was initially developed by this Gaidara company and then purchased and developed by Autodesk from 2006. While glTF is relatively new format. The standard was released in 2015 by the Kronos group, so our familiar group that is also the author of OpenGL standard. Now if you look at the popularity, then FBX is definitely the industry standard. Lots of game engines and 3D modeling tools and all sorts of 3D software usually use FBX. But recently glTF has also become quite widespread and it has somewhat different uses than FBX. We can also look at what different types of data they store. So like I said, they're quite complex. FBX can definitely store hierarchical meshes, cameras, lights, animations, blend shapes, and there's all sorts of things that it can store. A lot of these things are also legacy things that actually people don't use anymore. But this is quite comparable to glTF in the sense that it can also store hierarchical meshes, cameras, animations, and other things. Now there is a distinction when it comes to usage. So FBX is usually used to transfer between different software. For example, from Blender to Unreal Engine, or to some other game engine, or from other 3D software packages. While glTF is usually used for fast loading and rendering of the content for the end user. As you saw from before, the file format stores different numbers, different vertex coordinates, face indices, all sorts of things as data. Now this data has to be read by the importer and then converted to a form that is suitable for the GPU to render or for the engine to use. Now glTF does a lot of that already inside the format, so that's why it's very fast to load a glTF file instead of an FBX file. But a pro for FBX is that there is an official free licensable SDK. So the SDK that Autodesk develops for this format works the same way regardless if it's used in Unreal Engine or Blender or in some other software. It's the same SDK. The importing and exporting is gonna be uniform across all different software. But glTF, on the other hand, is a standard, so it's up to the different software developers to develop their importer and exporters according to the standard. So while FBX and glTF are comparable, both are very useful for their specific purposes. Now glTF stores its data in a JSON format. Here is an example of a glTF file, and you can read this file quite easily. So here we have a chopper node. It has two children indexes 2 and 3. So on 2 and 3 we have the blades and the body. And the blades also has some children 0 and 1. That's blade 1 and blade 2. And you can also see the transformations between these nodes. Now this file continues with something called buffers. And it can vary if these buffers are actually encoded in the glTF file itself or in a separate file, or if the entire file is actually binary. But basically these buffers are the data that can be directly sent to the GPU memory. This makes loading glTF files quite fast because all of this buffer, the engine does not have to read or manipulate this in some way or construct some other things from it. This is the buffer data that is directly sent to the GPU for rendering this object. From this video, you should now understand the FBX file format, so an industry standard, where is it useful for transferring data between different software, and Autodesk is developing it. You also know about the glTF file format, so it's very widespread for fast loading of meshes into the GPU memory. You also saw how it stores its data, so it has a JSON structure, and within that there is the buffer data, and that buffer data can be sent directly to the GPU, so loading it is really fast, and the Kronos group is developing that file format.